are certainly continue to be concerned about the ongoing Russian assault on the country.
On sanctioning Putin and Lavrov, yesterday President Biden had said that that was on the table. What changed between yesterday and today?
Well, it has been under consideration and on the table for some time, as you know, and as I just conveyed, the president's strong view and strong principle from the beginning of this conflict, and even before, I should say, has been to take actions and steps in alignment with our European partners, and this is certainly evidence of that.
And just finally on that one, what does sanctioning Putin himself do in the opinion of this administration? A lot of analysts have said that this is more of a symbolic move than anything.
Well, without getting into any specific details, I know you're not exactly asking me this, but sort of about financial assets, et cetera. I will leave that to others to speak to. Certainly the the step that we are doing in alignment and in coordination with the Europeans just sends a clear message about the strength of the opposition to the actions by President Putin and the direction in his leadership of the Russian military. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, continuing the questions on sanctions.
Yep.
Today we saw that the Italian government and the German government both said very clearly that they would not veto a move to remove Russia from the SWIFT transaction system. Can you say a word about how quickly you think something like that would happen, and whether you believe that that would be another productive tool and perhaps another moment, symbolic or rather an important measure?
Sure. Well, again, the president's principle is taking steps in alignment. We are stronger together, especially as we stand in the face of the Russian military's actions and their invasion of Ukraine. As it relates to SWIFT, we've never taken that off the table, of course, and I'm certainly not taking it off the table today, so certainly there'll be ongoing discussions about that. As you know, SWIFT is a messaging service that connects 11,000 banks, and many would argue that there are ways that the Russian leadership could get around that over the course of time, but it certainly remains an option on the table. In terms of the timeline, I don't have anything to predict for you on that.
We were also reported today that China has actually increased its reserves as opposed to releasing reserves, which could help perhaps with the energy price increases that we're seeing. Have you had, what do you think of that move? And then also, has there been any further communication? Does President Biden intend to talk to President Xi, or can you say a word about what you're doing in terms of trying to convince the Chinese to be supportive?
Well, I would note that also today the IEA had an informal meeting where they discussed options they could take over the coming days and weeks to help address any volatility in the global markets and the heightening of price volatility. And certainly that meeting today was a chance to consult and continue coordination with partners on global energy supply and security. There's also continuing conversations that we have had from here with partners over the past day. Secretary Granholm spoke with French, German, EU, and UK counterparts yesterday, and we'll continue those conversations. As it relates to China, I would say that the president's view, of course, is that now is the time for leaders of the world to not just speak out clearly against President Putin's flagrant aggression and to stand with the people of Ukraine, but this is not a moment for equivocation or hiding or waiting to see what happens next. It is already clear what's happening, and as a part of that, it's also important to be a part of the effort to mitigate and minimize the impact on global markets and global oil markets. And so I don't have any additional conversations to read out for you, but I would say certainly we all want to be part of the solution here and stand up in the face of aggression.
Kelly, the U.S. Treasury Department this morning announcing historic sanctions on the Russian central bank. It prohibits U.S. persons from transacting with the Russian central bank, Russia's National Wealth Fund, and its finance ministry. The U.S. is joined by, or will be joined by, nearly all developed nations in the sanctions that target a G20 central bank for the first time. The result has been a plunge in the ruble. It now takes, now it's 100. It had been as low as 110 rubles to buy a dollar, up from 83 on Friday and 73 before the war began. In other words, the ruble is worth about 1 U.S. cent. The decline promises higher inflation in Russia, a curbing of consumer goods imports, and possibly recession. The Russian central bank, in response, raised rates to a bone-cracking 20% from 9.5%, prohibited purchases of foreign-owned Russian assets, and requires companies to sell their hard currency back to the central bank, or 80% of it anyway.
Well, economic sanctions against Russia are starting to have an impact. The Russian ruble has plunged to a record low, dropping more than 30% against the US dollar. Russians are scrambling to withdraw money from banks, with long queues forming at cash machines across the country. In an attempt to prop up the ruble, Russia's central bank doubled its key interest rate to an unprecedented 20% and ordered domestic export companies to sell foreign reserves. Sanctions imposed by the US and Europe have also largely cut off the country from the global financial system.
European stock markets fell steeply as the financial sector reacted to the latest sanctions. Among those, major Russian banks would be kicked out of the global financial transaction network SWIFT at a cost not only to Russia but also to its trading partners. Over the weekend, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz made it clear that things could get even worse. Let's not kid ourselves. Putin will not change his course overnight. But very soon, the Russian leadership will feel the high price it is paying. Already in the last week, the Russian stock market sank by more than 30%. That shows our sanctions are working, and we reserve the right to impose further sanctions. So far, sanctions against Russia include the exclusion from SWIFT, making it impossible for sanctioned Russian banks to pay for and receive goods from abroad. There are also restrictions on major banks with immediate consequences. The European subsidiary of Russia's state-owned Sberbank is facing bankruptcy.
Russia has hit back with tit-for-tat sanctions on the West by banning that have been imposed by the West by banning airlines from 36 countries, including Britain and Germany. This comes after many have barred Russian planes from their airspace. Russia's Civil Aviation Authority said it was bringing in the restrictions as a retaliatory measure for the ban by the European states on flights without access to Russia's airspace. Carriers will have to divert flights south, while also avoiding several areas in West Asia. This comes after the whole of the European Union closed its airspace for Russian airlines. What this effectively means is a Russian flight cannot enter Ukraine from the country's northwest. Russia's foreign minister has cancelled a trip to the United Nations in Geneva due to the sanctions imposed by the EU countries. The Russian foreign minister was scheduled to address the UN Human Rights Council but had to cancel his trip. Meanwhile, these bans have mostly hit business jet traffic, and a substantial impact is likely to be on Russia's biggest airline, Aeroflot. The restrictions will force airlines from Russia to take longer routes. Dozens of flights were cancelled or sent on costly detours. The rerouting meant Kazakhstan's airspace saw a tripling of flights to more than 450. Flight cancellations will also set to affect cargo traffic, further worsening the global supply chain concerns.